In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to install Active Directory. The point I'm at right now is I have a virtual machine that has a clean install of the operating system. So the assumption is you have installed an operating system and you have activated the operating system through the internet. So now it'll run for 180 days. Once that's done, the first thing I want to do on my machine, if you've not already done this, I'm going to go to Server Manager, which should open automatically for you. I'm going to click on Local Server, and I'm going to set the IP configuration of this machine, and I'm going to rename it. By default, the IP address is set to obtain automatically. I must have a static IP address on my domain controller. So I'm going to double click my connection, and I'm going to go to Properties. I'm going to click TCP IP version 4, and I'm going to set a static IP address by click Use the following. And I'm going to use the address 192.168.1.250. Now, you can use that address because I will use that address throughout many of my courses, or you could choose a different IP scheme. That'll be your preference, but if you want to keep it simple, you can just use that address. Now, my lab environment here will not have internet access. The reason I do not set up my labs with internet access, a lot of the services we run can be disruptive on your network. I'm going to run DHCP, DNS, Active Directory in many of these labs, and if that were connected to your actual home network or your corporate network, it could disrupt services. If you want to connect to the internet, you could simply use an IP configuration that actually has internet access, but what I'm configuring here will not have access. So for that reason, I'm not going to enter a default gateway. The preferred DNS server on a domain controller should be itself. So you could type in 192.168.1.250, or you can use the loopback address, which is 127.0.0.1. Now, I just prefer to use the loopback, so I'm going to type that in. Does not matter what the IP address is. You could simply type 127.0.0.1, and that redirects back to the local machine, whatever its IP address is. So I'm going to click OK on that, and OK. I'm going to close that window. The IP configuration is now done for this machine. I'm also going to rename this machine. So I'm going to click on computer name here in the list. I'm going to click change, and I'm going to name this machine RTS-DC1. And I'm just going to click OK for that. That's going to tell me the machine has to reboot. And I'm just going to let that reboot. That'll take a moment. Then we will log back in and start installing Active Directory. My machine is now rebooted, so I'm just going to log back in. So we have an IP configuration and I have a computer name. Now I'm ready to install Active Directory. Server Manager will automatically open. If it does not, you can go to Administrative Tools and open it if you want to pull it up yourself. But I'm going to let it automatically open here. Then we'll install the Active Directory Domain Services role. Now, when this first comes up, depending on how many resources you've assigned to your machine, it may take a while before you can actually click on certain things. You'll see a blue bar kind of pulsates across while it's loading. Mine has finished loading. So I'm going to click Add Roles and Features. I'm going to click Next on the Before You Begin. That's just some informative stuff. I'm going to leave this on the default role-based or feature-based installation. Next for that. This is my machine, my RTS-DC1, 192.168.1.250. That's the IP address I assigned. Now, in your environment, you could name your machine whatever you want. You could use the same or different IP address. This is still going to be the same process. So I'm going to just make sure that's highlighted there and click Next. Active Directory Domain Services is what I intend to install. When I click that, it pulls up this window that says, this is going to add these features required for Active Directory Domain Services. We're always going to accept that. So I'm going to click Add Features because they're requirements. So Add Features, I'm going to click Next. On the feature screen, we're not selecting anything here, so leave that as is and select Next. On the Active Directory domain services, that's just informative. I'm going to click next there. So most of this stays as default. On the confirm installation selections, I am just clicking install. Now what this does is actually install the Active Directory domain services role. So it loads all the setup files I need to actually configure Active Directory. So that'll take just a moment to install, usually 1 to 3 minutes typically. Once that installs, then we will go through the configuration wizard. Now the install has completed. I can click this link, promote this server to a domain controller, but if you close this window, which many people do, I can do that same thing by clicking this notifications at the top right-hand corner of the screen. It's a flag with that yellow triangle. If I click that, it has that same link, promote this server to a domain controller. So I'm just going to click that link. Now, some of these windows take a moment to actually fully populate. So at times, many of these options will be grayed out for usually a few seconds once you open some of these windows. So don't be concerned if that happens. This deployment configuration, I'm going to create a brand new forest. So the assumption is you have absolutely nothing already configured. You don't have a domain or anything like that. You're setting this up for the first time. I'm going to name my domain rts.local. And you can name it whatever you like. That's just the name I'm going to choose here. So add a new forest. Forest name will be rts.local. It's also going to be that's also going to be my domain name. So I'm going to click next for that. Now again, it will take a moment before I can click in some of these fields here. This will ask me for the forest and domain functional level. We will leave those on default. The only thing I'm doing here is setting a restore password for Active Directory. That is mandatory. It just has to be a 7-character password. So set that. Do leave these options as default. DNS I want to be installed, so I'm going to make sure that is selected. It's always selected by default. Just do not deselect it. I'm going to click next for that. It tells me a delegation cannot be created. That is expected. So I'm going to click next for that. What this is going to do for DNS is install and configure everything we need in the DNS itself. So that'll be fully automated. My NetBIOS name automatically populates. We do not change that, so that's going to stay as RTS. On the path, which should pop up any moment, on the path, I have my database location, log file, and sysfile. Now, you could move those to another drive or another location. We have no need to do that, so that's going to stay default as well. I'm going to click next for that, and we're pretty much done. I'm going to click next at the bottom on the review options. It's going to run a prerequisite check just to make sure I have a static IP address and I meet all the requirements to install Active Directory. I know I do, so that'll take just a moment. Then it will let us install. So at the top here, it tells me all those prerequisite checks have passed. So I'm just going to click install, and it'll take a few moments, but then when it reboots, I will be a fully functioning domain controller. So we'll let that install, and then when it comes up, I'll log into it, and we'll make sure Active Directory is actually online. Do not be alarmed if this please wait for the GP service takes a while. It always runs for several minutes. Now I am up to the login screen. Notice it has my domain name, RTS/administrator. I'm just going to enter my password, and I am now logged in with my domain account. Takes just a moment for that to fully load. The first boot is slower after you install Active Directory and all the subsequent ones. But now that that's loaded, if I click on Tools, you'll see several Active Directory options. So Active Directory users and computers exist. The Active Directory module for Windows PowerShell. So I know this machine is a fully functioning domain controller.